I want to introduce a little bit about Samuel Yigzaw. He's a software engineer specializing in artificial intelligence and computer vision. Samuel has a master's degree in electrical and computer engineering from the University of Waterloo. Samuel recently became interested in economics about 2 years ago when he discovered Georgism. This is the first time Samuel presenting to a large audience on this particular topic. Welcome, Samuel.
Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending this presentation. The Remedy to All Economic Inequality, a presentation on the economics of Henry George and Sylvia Gesell. Now, I know this is a pretty inflammatory title, purposefully so, but I do believe in its truth. So hopefully you guys can follow me along with this. Another thing I want to state is that this presentation is actually quite long in its original form. And so therefore we won't have time to go through all of it. I've split the presentation in two. So this presentation is going to be the first half. It's going to cover the economics of Henry George and the specific issue that he was dealing with. And hopefully in a future presentation, we will be covering the second half of this presentation where I'll be able to finish off the remedy and hopefully everything will come together cleanly. So, if I want you guys to take anything away from this presentation and the next, it is this quote. If you receive income without creating wealth, someone else is creating wealth without receiving income. Now, this quote comes from the Sylvia Gesell Institute, a certain Josh Sideman. Essentially, this is the whole idea that I want you guys to understand and take away from this. If you are able to receive some sort of income or profit or earnings without actually doing the thing required to create that or to earn that physically, well then it's not free. Someone else is creating that wealth without receiving the corresponding income. In this society, we have various different problems around economic inequality, and because we fail to see the truth behind all of these issues, we end up trying to patch the actual issues using bandages. So in two main areas, mainly land and money, or as you can see here, housing and employment, various different bandages have been implemented where we try to control the outcome without understanding the underlying issues. Now, some of these bandages shown on screen, rent control, zoning, even things such as blocking Airbnb in cities where housing shortages are a major concern. This is, this is kind of very ridiculous, especially the last one. Things in employment sector, things like minimum wage, overtime pay, unionization. A lot of these things you might think it's obvious that we should have these because, without these things, people are going to get taken advantage of. But what we don't stop to consider is why are these people able to be taken advantage of in the first place? Why is there a power differential between, employees and employers, between landowners and renters? Why are there these power differentials that allow people to be taken advantage of in the first place, such that we need these bandages in order to kind of level the playing field a little bit? So I want you guys to think about these bandages as we go forward in the presentation. I won't be talking about the employment issue because that is part of the second half of the presentation, but the housing part is a major part of this presentation. So the first part, land. So this is the API. It's a philosophy institution. So I do want to start off with some philosophy. Ethics. This is the labor theory of property with proponents such as John Locke and Henry George. I want to start off trying to justify this labor theory of property from a more base foundation, body sovereignty, which is the idea that you own your own body. So we're going to start here and develop the rest. You own your own body. Now, you can agree with this or you can disagree with this. If you disagree with this, then you probably won't be able to agree with the rest of this presentation. But if you do agree with this, then you would also agree, for example, that maybe slavery is wrong, the owning of other people's bodies. No one can own your own body, things like this. If you can agree with that, then we can move forward. From owning your own body, we can say you own your own energy because your energy is internal to your body. From there, you can say that you own the produce of your energy, i.e., the fruits of your labor. So this is what makes ownership legitimate, right? We can follow the trail from body sovereignty to owning the fruits of your labor, and then we can conclude that owning the fruits of your labor is the only valid form of ownership because of this chain from start to finish. So this is the most just form of property rights. Um, the issue is we don't have these form of property rights in today's society, right? Things that come from the fruits of our labor, right? Our income, the things we buy, our own wealth, they get taken away from us in the form of taxes. So actually, we don't have this form of property rights. We are getting stolen from every day, according to the labor theory of property. You might ask, but how else do we fund the government? So I'm going to return the question. I'm going to ask you, what is a government? A government is an organization within society, with the mandate of being the custodian of the commons. And by doing this, it is meant to solve the tragedy of the commons. That is its purpose. Now, what is the commons? The commons is that which is owned by everybody. Individual ownership of the commons, it goes against the labor theory of property. Examples of this are things like land or location, natural resources, electromagnetic spectrum is a very unique case. There are many others. The reason why these things are owned by everybody, and they belong to the commons is because nobody put their labor in to produce these things. Nobody has created these things. They're not the produce of anyone's labor, and therefore they belong to nobody and they belong to everybody. So the government's mandate is to be a custodian of these things which belong to everybody. However, there's a problem. Land is required for the production of wealth. Land in all of its forms. When I say land, as a Georgist, land is a catch-all term for all things that are natural resources because they all share very similar properties, economically speaking. So land is required for wealth production, right? Individual control over land is most productive, right? Because we can use markets in order to be able to allocate resources efficiently. So markets require individual ownership of these natural resources. However, we just got done showing why individual control over something that's owned by everybody is unfair. It's unjust. It's theft. So what's the solution? Well, we want people to be able to own these things individually, but these things originally are owned by everybody. So the only solution is to provide compensation for individual ownership. So land, now I'm talking about land in the sense of like actual ground, is worth a certain amount of money per year. This is called rent, the rent on the land. And this rent can be paid back to society or to the government as tax. This is called the land value tax. It's a tax on the value of the land that someone is trying to appropriate from society. So this tax gets redistributed to society in the form of government spending, and it turns out that no other taxes on labor or wealth are required. So how do we fund the government? Through this land value tax. Land is not the fruit of one's labor. Land is not created by anybody. It belongs to nobody and to everybody. So when we buy land, we are essentially buying the right to take that land and exclude the rest of society from that location. Land has ongoing value. It's not a one-time purchase. When you buy a piece of land, it is bringing you a certain amount of value today, tomorrow, the day after, and years after. It is not something that can be captured with a single purchase. So that means we need to essentially have it so that the ongoing value that you are receiving from this land is something that you will ongoingly compensate society for. So here is just a quick rule of thumb that I want to share with you guys. Tax what you want to reduce. So if you tax income, you get less income. You tax sales, you get less consumption, less people buying things. You tax corporations, you get less entrepreneurs. You tax buildings, you get less housing developments. And that's the main issue that we're facing right now. You tax negative externalities, well, you get less negative externalities. And we'll talk about that in the future slides. However, if you tax land, you can't get less land. Land doesn't get up and walk away. When you tax land, it doesn't get reduced. And because the land does not get reduced, the supply does not diminish, it doesn't produce market distortions when you tax the land. Additionally, tax cannot be hidden away in a tax haven like wealth can, like income can. Income people misreport their income all the time. People, go to unofficial stores and buy things under the table without paying the sales tax all the time. It's very easy to avoid many of the taxes that we have applied to society. You cannot avoid this tax because you can't avoid your land getting accounted for. But then you might ask, how can you get the same tax revenue from land that we used to get from all of the other taxes that will have to be removed? So this is a specific Georgist idea called at core. All taxes come out of rent. The idea here is that when you tax labor and capital, people get poorer, right? And poorer people are less able to pay rent, and so therefore rents drop. However, if you don't tax labor and capital, people get richer. Well, then when people get richer, rents rise, and then we can tax all of that rent increase. Therefore, if you were to remove all of the taxes on labor and capital, you would be able to shift all of that tax burden onto the land and tax the land instead. And the reason why this is the case, and the reason why all of the taxes get shifted onto the land, is because, as we said earlier, land doesn't change in supply. So its value is purely determined by demand. And because it's purely determined by demand, the higher the demand, i.e., when people get richer, directly proportional, the land will increase in value as well. But it gets even better. This is another Georgist idea. Excess burdens come out of rent. Essentially, what this is saying is all taxes that tax productivity create what's called a deadweight loss. Deadweight loss means an inefficiency in the economy. So, an inefficiency in the ability to produce. So taxing productivity instead of land generates less income and makes life more expensive. Now, I'd like to share some graphs to show you exactly what I mean by this. So as you can see, there's on this graph, it's a supply and demand curve. If you guys can see my mouse, the supply curve is going up and the demand curve is going down. And where the supply and demand curves meet, essentially, is where the price gets discovered. So basically, you have a bunch of people who are willing to produce a certain product for like there's one person who's willing to produce it at 1, another person is willing to produce it at the price of 10 or 20, and different people are willing to produce this at varying different amounts, and there's varying different people who are willing to buy this product for varying different amounts, right? Someone's willing to buy it at 90, someone's willing to buy it at 80, and such and such. So when the person willing to produce this item at 50 makes a sale, all of these other people realize, oh, we can make a sale at $50 instead of at $10 or at $20. Oh, that's brilliant. I'm going to sell it at that price too. And when the person who buys this product at 50 makes that purchase, all of these other people who are willing to buy it at 90, at 80, at 70, they say, oh, we can buy this at 50 instead? Oh, that's amazing. I'm going to buy it at that price too. And so then the price gets discovered to be 50, right? And at this price, five people are willing to make that trade. Five people from the producer side and five people from the consumer side. Now, this red triangle is essentially showing the amount of profit that has been earned from the supply side, right? These people, these five people have essentially earned profit because he was willing to sell it at 10, but he made 50 instead. And this blue triangle is the profit made by the consumer side, right? This person was willing to buy it at 90, but he bought it at 50 instead. So you can see here, there's no taxes and no nothing in the system. Both sides have profited a certain amount, right? And this is good. This is well and dandy. So now we have the consumer surplus and the producer surplus. Now, what happens when we introduce tax? So let's say we have a sales tax on the specific product. It increases the price of this product by 20. Okay? So this product gets increased by 20. The supply curve gets shifted upwards. Now, you can see the new supply curve meets the demand curve at four people willing to buy and sell at $60. So what happens? This is the new graph, right? You can see here at $60, from $40 to $60 times four sales. That's the green rectangle, which represents the amount of money earned in taxes by the government. Now we still have the same red and blue triangles representing the surpluses for the consumers and the producers, right? So now we have red, green, and blue. And those things are, accounted for in the economy. But what we end up seeing is in this black triangle, actually, there is nothing happening. The production within this black triangle has gone missing. This is the deadweight loss that we are seeing. So this black triangle is essentially showing the economic inefficiencies that are caused by this taxation. Now this tax was basically a tax of 20. What happens if we increase this tax to 30, 40, 50? This rectangle will get slimmer and taller, and this black triangle will end up taking up the majority or all of this space. So the higher you raise the tax, the more inefficient the economy becomes. Now, what happens with land? Now, the thing that changes with land is that the supply curve is different for land. As we said earlier, supply is fixed. The land doesn't, change. It doesn't increase. It doesn't decrease. So the supply curve is actually going straight vertical. It has a single quantity that doesn't change price based off of the price of the demand curve or anything. So where this new supply curve meets the demand curve at 50, that's where we're going to see everything play out. So here we have a new consumer surplus, this blue triangle, and a new producer surplus, which is this red rectangle. So the supply of land is fixed and its value is solely determined by the demand curve, right? So if the demand curve goes up, then the price will go up. If the demand curve goes down, then the price will go down. Now this graph here shows what a tax on 50% of the value of this land would look like. As you can see, the green rectangle captures 50% of the producer surplus, and there's no deadweight loss. There's no inefficiencies in this economy. And we can take this further. We can tax all of it, 100% of it, and take that revenue and distribute it to the government without creating any economic inefficiencies. So this is a perfect tax that incurs no deadweight loss, and additionally provides the function of returning the value that was taken from land appropriation back to society. So it's beneficial on two fronts. Now, to back up a bit, you might ask, what about property tax? We already have property tax, right? This should be something that is already being done in society. Well, property tax is actually two different taxes put together. It's a land value tax, yes, but it's additionally a building value tax. You get taxed on the value of the building that's being produced on the property. So when we tax the buildings, you get less development projects and you get less housing, right? Why would we do this? We're in the middle of a housing crisis all across the world. Currently, I'm in Canada. It's in Toronto. This is the worst housing crisis ever in the city. and many other parts of the world, America, Europe, are going through similar housing crisis. Why are we taxing things that we want to build more of? So that's an issue. Now, you might ask, how do we calculate the land value tax for every plot of land, right? If we're going to have a tax that is solely based off of the value of the land, then how do we accurately evaluate that value? Okay, so calculating the land value tax. There are two methods that I would want to show here, and there could be other methods as well. Various different people are working on this. It's an ongoing problem. It's a problem that people are trying to solve all the time right now, especially in the Georgist movement. So right now, I'll just talk about two main methods. So there's a centralized method, right? We already have government agencies that are property assessors. They they already go out to various different properties and assess the land value and the building value separately, and then combine the two, and then uh, assess the actual property value so that you can be taxed on the property tax. So what we have to do is essentially make their lives easier. Just remove the building value assessment portion of it and just keep the land value part. Assessing land value is much, much easier than assessing the value of a building, right? You have to assess how much it's depreciated and how much its value would go on the market today, and what kinds of things are part of the interior of the building, things like that. Much harder than of assessing the value of a single location. So that is one very easy method of streamlining the process to moving to land value taxation. Cons, however, are that, well, obviously assessors must be hired and paid, right? This is not a con in the from the perspective of today's system, because this is something we already do. But in the long term, it would be nice to have a system where things ran smoothly without having to have an entire government agency being required for it. And then secondly, another con is that it might be potentially inaccurate because, again, this is humans doing the assessment, using various different metrics and things that they have to calculate by hand or using a computer. And, it's not exactly taking market values into account. So what's the second method? Taking the market values into account, right? So using a market mechanism. So there are different market mechanisms that can be used for land value discovery. My favorite are, different kinds of auctions. So you can auction the land, um, especially when an owner, relinquishes ownership of the land. If the land is empty, the land can go for auction, and it can very easily be used to price that land. And if the land is not empty, well, there's an issue here where you can't simultaneously do auctions on land and building improvements, because those two auctions could have separate winners, and so then that would cause an issue. So what would need to be done is, for example, you can do auctions on the building's value instead, and then use nearby auction data from auctions that sold empty land, in the neighborhood, to kind of average that out and then determine the value of the land being sold then. So those that's like using a market mechanism for determining the land value tax. So the pros would be obviously that market mechanisms are very, very good with accuracy, and they're very inexpensive. We use the market all the time to price all the goods that we buy in a a free market economy. So it basically distributes the computational costs across the entirety of society. So that's what makes it very accurate and efficient. The cons, however, is that it's hard to understand and implement. It gets quite complex, and it might be hard to understand the way that I explained it right now. So it's quite hard to kind of get it across, as opposed to using land assessors, very simple. It might lose accuracy in regions where ownership transfers have not occurred in a long time, right? Especially if you're trying to value the land using a proxy, and that's the third issue, right? Some of the land is going to be determined via proxy, especially when there's buildings on top of it that also need to be auctioned off. So these are two different methods of valuing the land. We're constantly, uh, you know, trying to work on the theory. Auction theory is a very huge area of economics, especially in this area. Trying to value land and improvements or buildings simultaneously and separately. So this is an area of research that this is ongoing. But even without needing to go through all of the research, going through with one of these mechanisms, either the market mechanism or a centralized method, is perfectly fine. So why we are in a housing crisis right now. So we have obviously landowners, right? Unfairly benefiting from what's called positive externalities and then blocking things that incur negative externalities. So what are externalities? Externalities are basically that's those things in the economy that happen that are essentially uh, third party. They don't affect the actual transaction, but they affect everyone else, right? So for example, when a factory produces pollution, that is an externality. It's kind of beside the actual thing that it produces, which is, whatever its product is, that it sells to consumers. Or, uh, for example, in this example, when a housing, like let's say a large apartment gets developed in a neighborhood, well, that's going to incur different externalities to the other houses in the neighborhood, right? Which are, independent of the things that happen with that building and whoever lives in that building. So positive and negative externalities are things that we should be trying to take into account whenever we, design an economy. And currently, whenever landowners benefit from a positive externality, let's say a new transit network getting built in their neighborhood, well, then they're all for that. It's beneficial for them. They're not going to do anything. In fact, they're going to encourage it. And then that's going to raise the value of their homes, and then they're going to earn profit from that. Whereas if things happen that are negative to their neighborhood, well, they're going to, block everything that has to do with that. And this is called NIMBYism. It's encouraged by our current system. This just the incentive structures. So how is that so? Well, we sell land with a one-time price, right? At the very beginning of the transfer of land, it gets sold for a one-time price. So that price, no matter what it is, if negative externalities occur in the neighborhood, that price will get lowered. The value that they put into their house will disappear, right? And so then that's, to them it's unjust because they're getting essentially robbed. However, if positive externalities appear in their neighborhood, well, that will raise the price of their house. And so therefore, they welcome that because they're not paying for it. They already paid for their house. And so even though it's equally as unjust, they'll welcome it. So because of this, there's a very good incentive to continue to advocate for this system of having land being sold with a one-time price and then just leaving it after that because it helps a lot of people who are landowners. So how does the land value tax solve this housing crisis? So if there are positive externalities in your neighborhood, what happens is the value of your land increases, and so then you end up paying a larger land value tax, which offsets the value that you've gained from that positive externality. And simultaneously, if negative externalities occur in your neighborhood, well, you might say, oh, that's, bad for the value of my house and everything. Yes, the land value will decrease, but then that ends up lowering your taxes. And so therefore you end up with a net zero effect. So no matter what happens to your neighborhood, positive or negative, you're indifferent to the effects because it at the end of the day you come out with a zero sum effect. So for a fair and just society, what do we want to do? We want to allow everyone to keep the fruits of their labor, so end all taxes on productivity, and then we should have a tax should be a mechanism for returning to society that which is taken from society. So if you take land or other land-like things from society, well then taxes should be a mechanism of returning that to society. And also other things that society would want to reduce, such as negative externalities. The collected tax should be then spent to support the state's programs, right? All the things that the government actually is going to end up spending money for. And there's going to be so much tax revenue that whatever gets left over should be returned to the people, right? Because that revenue actually belongs to society in the first place. So things that society may want to tax, things like land-like resources, natural resources, even things like intellectual property could be things that you might say belong to society, and therefore we might want to uh, control in different ways than the current way of doing things. It's possible. Or negative externalities. These are called Pigovian taxes, taxing negative externalities such as environmental degradation or sin taxes. So I want to go through a few of these things. Natural resources. Natural resources such as oil, gold, minerals, mining, the actual resources themselves, not the extraction process, the resources themselves are not the produce of anyone's labor. So if you are trying to appropriate these things from the country, well, they should, pay the country for that, for the right to do that, right? So this is called severance taxes. And you can have various different market mechanisms again to price these things. So different kinds of auctions, for example, for exploration contracts and for extraction rights as well. Intellectual property. So many Georgists actually they believe that IP, specifically patents and potentially other pieces of IP, have what's called land-like properties, right? So essentially, they are things that ideas are not something that should be owned by an individual. They should be owned by the humanity essentially. A lot of the times, patents are just solely filed in order to conduct patent wars between companies, various different companies hoarding patents so that they can defend it themselves or attack other companies, in lawsuits. And this is just not productive in the actual creation of ideas. So yeah, knowledge should not be withheld from anyone, but at the same time, we still want to incentivize knowledge discovery, right? So patents do a good job of incentivizing knowledge discovery, but then at the same time, they do a poor job of incentivizing knowledge dispersal. So one way to actually, with the removal of patents or IP, right, intellectual property, one way to incentivize knowledge discovery is through other kinds of, mechanisms again. So one such thing could be a harbinger tax, which I could go into the future. Harbinger tax is essentially a tax that is self-imposed, and essentially you value whatever you want to kind of hold on to, and then uh, a certain percentage of that value can be paid to the government as a tax. So there's various different mechanisms that could be used if we think properly about how to improve various different things that hold these land-like properties. Environmental degradation is another area. So, environmental degradation is one such negative externality. So it could be things like plastic pollution, carbon pollution, water pollution, things like that. And if you're going to pollute the society, pollute the actual land that everyone is trying to use and live with, uh, there's depending on how the society feels about that, there's a solid case to be made for compensating society for that action. And so there's various different types of taxes: carbon taxes, taxes on water pollution, even taxes on deforestation, which could also be mixed with severance taxes on the actual wood itself. Also taxes on landfills, garbage, and single-use plastics as well. Sin taxes. So sin taxes are usually they're called sin taxes. Essentially, they're talking about taxes on things that we view as either bad behavior or things that are stuff that we don't want to have in our society. So basically, things like drugs, tobacco, alcohol, and other things, sugar, gambling. These things could negatively affect society in various different ways. And you can apply different kinds of taxes on them because you can view these as a negative externality as well, especially when you have services that are paid for by society, such as healthcare, various different things like that, which are burdened by these things that are we're trying to tax away, right? So a sugar tax, for example, or a tax on alcohol, things like that, or tobacco, could directly fund healthcare services. So that's one potential tax as well. Finally, I would like to go over what I was talking about earlier with the citizens' dividend. So the idea here is the amount of tax revenue collected is not dependent on the financial needs of the government. And the government simultaneously should not strive to spend all of the money that they're earning from taxes. The tax, as we said earlier, is a means of uh, taking from society those things that people appropriate and redistributing it, right? So the idea here is to take that which is owed from those who owe and return it to those who are owed. So that when government spends all that is required for its programs, there's leftover money, and that money should be returned to society. So since the LVT is a compensation paid to society for the appropriation of land, it is society that should get uh, the remains of the tax revenue once everything is paid for. And this is called the citizen's dividend. So that is coming to the end of the presentation. In summary, I would like to revisit all of the ideas. So people have a natural right to own and exchange their own property. Their property is the fruits of their labor and nothing else. Land is not the fruits of one's labor. Land appropriation is necessary for efficient production in the economy, but land appropriation must be continuously paid for with the land value tax. The land value tax can be calculated using land assessors or market mechanisms. The current tax system is the cause of the housing crisis and half of the cost of the unjust economic inequality in general. So as we said earlier, the next half will be discussed in the next presentation. There are many other land-like resources and negative externalities which could be given a similar treatment to land. And when all social services are paid for, the money can be returned to society. So that is the end of the Georgism portion of this talk, the land problem. And in the next presentation, I will be going over the problem with money, specifically interest, and how that is also a form of income that one can earn without producing any wealth. Thank you.
We're going to take questions now, and I can see that John Cummins is first up. So, John, ask the question, and we'll begin there.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I thought it was a great presentation.
Thank you.
It seems the point of Georgism is to try to put the economy on a ethical foundation.
Yep,
much
exactly.
like the Bitcoin entrepreneurs claim they are doing. However, I don't understand how their system actually accomplishes it, but to me, it's very clear how your system of patents and royalties on natural resources and patent limitation could do that very thing. So thanks very much for your presentation.
Thank you. And to jump off of that, the idea of Bitcoin is so that essentially they're trying to create a monetary system that doesn't rely on centralized governments. And, you know, it's I think it's a flawed idea. And in the next presentation that deals with money, I'll specifically go into why it's a flawed idea. Bitcoin is essentially trying to become the new gold, and that is not what you want in an economy. So we will discuss that in the next presentation.
Thank you, John. Ari, you're up next.
First, before my question, I do want to acknowledge Sam or Samuel. This was really fantastic. I really appreciate from the bottom of my heart I have gratitude of this. This is, in my humble opinion, exactly what the world needs us to come together around these kind of things and really create social capital for. So I really salute your effort and I really appreciate it. And I thank you.
Thank you.
Moving directly to my question. You mentioned intellectual property in a very robust way that I totally agree with. My father is a patent attorney, so I have a deep understanding, and I couldn't agree with you more. The specific question is, what would be the mechanism of action that would replace this? I'm not sure if you're going to talk about that in a future talk, so I don't want to ruin it. But if you're meant to talk about it here, I'm really curious what a substitute was, or even a moderated, like if you say we don't want to get rid of capitalism, we just want to have a limited or a modified version of. Do you have some sort of suggestion that specifically addresses not just the problem, but really offers a robust solution?
Yeah, so that's a good question. This is something I'm actually thinking very deeply about because in my eyes, I have basically discovered a solution for land and for money, and I think IP is probably the last frontier of things that I would like to discover a solution for. But there's already a really good solution out there. I don't think it's exactly perfect, but it is much better than what we have already. And it's what I went over briefly in the presentation called a harbinger tax. So essentially what this tax, what it's supposed to do is essentially
Could you say that a little bit slower? Sorry, I heard that before, but
harbinger.
do you think we could like spell that in the chat or something? I just want to look it up.
Yeah. Let me see if I can put it in the chat. There we go. It might be Harburger, I'm not sure, but whatever. So basically what this tax is basically uh, it's a self-assessed tax. It could be about anything, really, but applying it to IP, the idea is that you place a value on on your intellectual property, and then you get taxed a certain proportion of that value every year, and the proportion will be increasing across time. So maybe over 20 years or whatever, you can raise the percentage of the tax from 0 to 100% of the actual IP, and then
Is sorry to interrupt. Is this like a revenue that you're getting, or this is a penalty, like a discount rate, but in the negative form? Like you're going to first get taxed 2% and the next year 4%, and these are like the taxes on the earnings that you would have gotten from this. Is that the idea?
No, so you will value it based off of your own projections of how much you'll earn it from it, and then that valuation will get taxed. Simultaneously, the IP is not a monopoly. It'll be a license. So other people can also license the IP for the rate that you have specified. So whatever, value you've put on the intellectual property, that value will be taxed, or will be the value that other people can use to license that intellectual property from you. So you're not blocking anyone from using the IP, but at the same time, you're also incentivizing people to come up with ideas and share them with society because they are getting compensated for it.
Can I just have you confirm? This sounds more like a license or a royalty method. Is that what you're sort of describing?
It
In a
is,
very
yes.
general. And I know it's not exactly the same, but I'm just trying to conceptualize it.
Yep, it is. It is. Other people might conceptualize it differently. Maybe other people in the Georgist movement might conceptualize it with, full monopoly rights. I'm more about the licensing rights. I don't believe the monopoly rights are a necessary, um, you know, uh, incentive for knowledge creation. And time again, we've seen many different kinds of knowledge creation formats and movements in technology where monopolies are not required, especially in programming. My area of expertise, the open source movement is a very good example of that.
Okay, thank you, Ari. We'll go on to the next question now, and that's Bud. So, Bud, the floor is yours.
Um, so just kind of a more of a larger anthropological question. Does this system, is it robust enough to hold up in an environment where the moral commons is not very robust?
The moral commons.
Yes. Are you familiar with the term?
I'm not familiar with moral commons. Like, are you talking about like a social contract or?
In effect, where your entire society has a common overall understanding of what is good, what is right, what is wrong. It is the constraints that undergird everything else.
Mhm.
It's the implicit rules that we all generally agree by. But if a commons is robust, is if everyone shares generally all the same things.
Okay.
But when we have a multi-plural society, you that commons breaks down.
Mhm.
And so um, if we cannot agree that stealing is bad, then you'll see more people stealing.
Mm. Okay, so
So
yeah, so this sounds like how I envision the idea of a social contract. I think it's pretty much the same thing. And obviously, this is a talk on economics and not on anthropology or politics. So you can embed this system in any society really, and it'll work. But yes, there are requirements of, people believing in, for example, the ethical justification that I gave in the very beginning,
Mhm.
where people have to follow that idea and follow the reasoning of, okay, yes, we are not uh, able to own other people or other bodies. And then, okay, we're not able to own other people's outputs. And, this is a very, philosophical
Mhm.
train that they have to kind of progress across. And certain people or certain societies might not make it all the way across to the end of that ethical line of justification. And if they can't, follow that, then I guess there would be issues um, with implementing this in such a society, or even if a society where half of the people agree and half of the people don't, that would be an issue. Additionally, a lot of these issues are caused because half of the population, the landowners, are benefiting from the system, and half of the population, the renters and the homeless, are very much not benefiting. They're getting hurt by the system. And so what we have is a system currently that is essentially driving a wedge halfway in between society. And those who are above the wedge, you know, get rise, and then those who are below the wedge will fall even further down. And this is, uh, unearned income is that's the nature of it. So right there and then you see a stratification of the society where half of them uh, will think one way and half of them will think the other way. And so that's kind of one of the main issues actually with trying to get Georgism to be more out there in the mainstream and implemented as well.
Uh, what would be the perfect conditions for the application of Georgism? What society would be perfect for Georgism?
Sadly,
Hypothetically.
yeah, sadly, it would be the perfect society would be one that is starting anew, because then there's no, talking about, oh, you're taking my land away from me, oh, you're, taking the things I have away from me. So that's one of the major issues with implementing Georgism. And so starting a new, maybe in third world economies where there isn't an entrenchment in land ownership, or economies that are even economies that are going through housing crises where people are starting to go for anything and look for any kind of solution that would possibly get them out of this mess. Uh, you know, those kinds of things would probably be the best areas to implement Georgism.
Okay, thank you, Bud. We'll just go on to the next question now. So, Heather, can you? It's yours. It's your turn. Heather.
Hey, sorry, just trying to figure out my phone here. Okay, so that was interesting. I was just trying to figure out, I didn't hear you talk about things that are very land intensive, like food production. Now, and you're not just taxing the profits, you're taxing the land, and presumably the land taxes would have to be much higher than now. So it just seems like you're disincentivizing food production.
Okay, so this is a common question. First of all, by taxing land, we're removing taxes on everything else that a farmer, for example, would have to pay taxes on the sale of his crops or the sale of his livestock, taxes on any buildings that he has, taxes on any company that he might own, things like that, income tax, stuff like that. Second of all, a land value tax is actually perfect for farmers as well. Because what does the land value tax do? It's a tax on the value of the land. And farmers already, they place their farms in areas where the value of the land is not that high, right? Because land value is high where people want to live, right? In cities, downtown cores. These are the areas where real estate is very, very, very competitive. The land value tax will take those areas and tax them a lot more so that they're incentivized to use their land as efficiently as possible. Because when a piece of land is getting taxed the same amount, no matter if you build a bungalow on it or if you build a 20-story building on it, and that location is apt for a 20-story building, well, then people are going to build 20-story buildings. And this is how we solve the housing crisis, by encouraging people to utilize the land efficiently. But
Yeah,
farmland,
it's not necessarily true though that people farm where people don't want to live. Like for example, the Niagara region has quite high land values, but the land is also pretty unique for farming in terms of like its microclimate and
mm,
how warm it is relative to most places in the province.
Well, it's still perfect because the land value tax, as I said earlier, is going to prevent inefficiencies in building. And so what that encourages is it encourages efficient use of land and it discourages sprawl. Because sprawl is just taking land and utilizing it as inefficiently as possible. So when you concentrate people into city cores and build large buildings where people can live within close proximity of all the things that they need, well, then they don't need to go and sprawl out into the farmland where people are trying to grow agriculture. Additionally, land value tax is going to essentially make sure that whichever is the best case utilization for that piece of land, that is the utilization that wins out, right? Because the way to determine the best case utilization is, okay, which utilization will make the most money and therefore earn the most rent that can be taken in tax. So whoever's willing to pay the most amount of rent for that piece of land will be able to essentially determine the use and the value of that land. And so that's how the market determines what is best for that piece of land.
Yeah, okay. Well, I just see farming as one example, but basically you would be incentivizing um, probably a lot of services that use next to no land because they're basically, going to have all their profits and not have to pay any taxes on it. Whereas things that use land, like there's a huge investment well, in farming, like if you're growing fruit, you have to grow trees. It may be, a decade or so before the trees are actually productive. Like that's just a huge investment. And all the while, they're paying the taxes based on the land value, which is the same whether the trees are, fully grown and producing or, just planted and have a decade or more to go before they're productive.
So we'll talk about,
There's other industries where I can see a problem too,
okay.
because again they're like very land intensive in terms of building and anything that requires a lot of investment in the land when the land is not owned by that person and is taxed very highly, they're going to be quite reluctant to go in that kind of business.
Yeah, so this was, like I said earlier, this is only half of the solution. We'll talk about a lot of the things you talked about in the next presentation, things such as loans, things such as profits, the things that you mentioned, uh, being able to make an investment today and reap the rewards in the future years. These kinds of things touch on how we utilize money, and at the end of the day, it touches on interest. So. Those kinds of things will be talked about. So this is only half the solution, and hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully,
Okay.
you
Thank
can
you.
wait for
Thank,
that.
And
thank you,
it just
Ed.
seems to me
Thank you.
like a lot of tech companies, again, well, they already make massive profits, but, would make even more profits because,
Yeah, we'll
very
talk about
little,
profits. Don't worry.
little taxes. Okay.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you.
Heather. Thank
Yeah,
you,
That was
Heather.
good.
Yeah,
thank you.
thank you. John.
Yes, thanks, Ronan. I don't have a question actually. I would like to, congratulate Samuel on the quality of the presentation
Thank
and
you.
also the questioners, if that's the right term, on the quality of the questions which have been asked so far. I just wanted to point out something to you, Ronan, that I noticed that some people, like in the thumbnails, as a lot of thumbnails, have been putting up their physical hands,
Hmm.
to ask questions. And of course, we don't notice it. So I just wanted to reiterate, and maybe you want to iterate to everyone.
Yeah,
But in order,
I haven't noticed that. So yes, if you are putting your hand up, instead, can you please just use the hand up icon in the Zoom menu to put up your hand, and I will definitely get to you.
yeah, and the reaction. Yeah, thanks, Ronan. I just wanted to
Yeah.
mention that.
Yeah, the icon is reactions.
Right. Right.
Okay, so now, Tori, you can go.
Okay. Thanks, Ronan. And thank you, Samuel. That was a good overview of the Georgist approach to taxes. Thank you for going into the different aspects of it as well, the different, you might say, economic aspects of it. I'm just curious that I think the real kind of weak spot of the Georgist scheme is determining that land value.
Yeah.
And mentioned there's two sides, there are two approaches, assessors or market value. But assessors I think would essentially go to market value. I mean, everything becomes
They
market
would
value.
attempt to, yeah.
Right. So, but I think the problem is it's never gonna. There's no absolute value to land. Uh, you know,
Yeah.
either in Toronto or worldwide. The land value is constantly changing,
Yeah.
which is another way of saying market values will be the ultimate determinant of the land value. So, I mean, you can certainly separate land value from the value added constructions or agriculture or activities
Yeah.
that are
Improvements.
on top of the land. But it's all, the land value is always going to be changing. It's going to be going up and down.
Yep.
So, or you know, probably mostly up as the world population increases and things like that.
Exactly.
So the how you can actually determine that land value, it doesn't seem like you'd ever have a finite value, since it's so kind of changing and ephemeral. I mean, there's various arbitrary ways of saying the value added of the activities on top of the land. Um, I mean, over time, if people migrate from one city out to the countryside, obviously the land value in the country is going to be higher now,
Yeah.
and the former values of the city are gone. So you can't really.
So you're saying
It's
it'll
a
be
moving
constantly
target.
changing. Yeah, and it is a moving target. That's definitely the case. But I
Well,
don't think.
and like I would like to say, emphasize Heather's remarks that if you're, you know, people build structures for long term or do agriculture for long-term use,
Yeah.
and you can't. It would inhibit investments in land for specific uses if from year to year the land value tax would be changing. They'd never be able to calculate a return on investment if they knew that the picture in the future was so uncertain on
Mm.
what they'd be paying in tax. So I don't know. It seems like that's the big black hole in the Georgia scheme that would disable the thing. I mean, there's really not. I've heard that there are attempts to implement some degree of Georgist philosophy in different countries around the world, like Taiwan or Denmark. Somebody mentioned in the notes,
Yeah.
the Netherlands.
Singapore.
Well, and but I have not heard of the empirical results as to, how that has produced any of the remedies that you speak of, like resolving the housing crisis and things like that. So,
Well, Singapore is a good example of doing just that in such a small location, having a tax policy that is partially Georgist. It's not fully Georgist, and it's not really, the best implementation of Georgism, but it is at least partially inspired by Georgism. And they were able to essentially house a huge population in a small island with essentially the entire city is high rises, and
right.
and everyone is living in affordable housing that is within apartments. And so that's a good example of one case. I'd like to touch on your earlier point of the moving target.
Mhm.
And I think this is not an issue with Georgism. It's an issue with economics in general, right? How do we justifiably um, say that, okay, we should allocate this resource to this location, this resource to that location, or we should allocate this amount of things here and there, if we don't know what the conditions are going to be like in the future? That's the major issue that you're talking about. If we don't know what the population is going to be like 10 years from now, if we don't know, the next government is going to be doing such and such with immigration, if we don't know that, okay, uh, pollution is going to be a huge issue 10 years from now, and certain locations will not be livable, things like that, then how can we plan for the future and invest properly? So that's an economic issue in general. I don't think that's specifically a Georgist issue. The Georgist um, approach is to try to compensate everyone fairly for the things that they take from society, and return those things that are taken back to society. I think that should be that should be fairly um, universally agreed upon, whether or not the economy in the future can be predicted. properly.
Thank you, Tori. We're just because there are so many people asking questions, we're going to go to the next question. But Tori, you can go back and ask if there's time. But we have lots of people. So Peter Ginsburg, you're up now.
Thank you very much. You have a hospital which you want to run as a nonprofit. Next door to
I'm
it,
sorry, it's very hard to hear you, Peter.
Can you speak up, please, Peter? And
you
it
have
would
a
be nice.
hospital.
It would be nice if you can turn your camera on too, as well, if you can. You don't have to, but
There you go.
okay, great.
You have a hospital that you want to run as a nonprofit. Next door to it is a luxury hotel. The two buildings have the same footprint. Please explain how this system is going to work.
So the way the system is going to work is essentially the hospital is going to have to be located in a location where it makes sense. So the location has to be, an area where people, where it's able to essentially collect the amount of earnings from the populace such that it is able to pay the rent for that location. You cannot have uh, a an area of land within the downtown core of a city that is not being properly utilized. If there's a housing crisis and people want to use that land to build housing, then it's not the location to build, various different things, no matter if they're a charity or not.
You need your hospital to be close to your population. You realize that.
Okay, well then that the market will be the determiner of that. If the market determines that, okay, this location is in dire need of a hospital, well then, the earnings from that hospital will reflect that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's an interesting answer. I mean, I would have a question for that answer, but I'm not going to ask the question because I'm the moderator. So I'm going to move on to Ari. Ari, you're up.
Yes, thank you.
Great.
I want to, and at first, I really appreciate your defense, and I don't want to feel like an attacker like everybody is putting you, but there are some definite real holes, and I think it's actually like you're saying, more a problem with economics, but it requires really non-market solutions. The market is not gonna be able to do this, and I want to talk about this from a slight meta principle, and then ask the question from this meta principle that there are essentially morality is about making choices based on values, and a lot of values are outside of what's just worth money. For instance, if you have, let's say, a beautiful island where there's certain turtles that are the only turtles that will leave there, live there or mate there, but you could make the land value of that an amazing luxury hotel, right? How do you tax that? How do you prevent that? There's certain sort of non-monetary items I would call priceless items in nature, similar to just the farming idea that the farm cannot compete against the huge building. There needs to be essentially what modern developmental groups have, or developmental urban economics has, is zoning. And this requires politics of people choosing that, oh, this is going to be zoned for farming, and then it is according to farming land value principles. Or this is going to be hospital zoning, and then it's going to be similarly taxed to other hospitals. But luxury hotels are going to outperform. For instance, in the simple, I feel like contradiction to this is like California, for instance, was a beautiful area that the future everybody just wants to be tourists or like Airbnbs. Then the whole place becomes tourism because that will outperform economically. And then you have a whole land of just tourists. And you don't want a whole area like this tourist because they will not have the same moral incentivization or behavior as locals who are invested in a long-term residential behavior. And you see this as a problem with Airbnbs, as like communities that are robust, getting some either gentrified or other ways where money is replacing morality. And this is to some degree a big hole in overall economics. And I don't know if Georgism is meant, this is where the question is Georgism even trying to address this, or is it just sort of ignoring this completely?
So my answer would be Georgism, the Georgia system is so amazingly efficient and kind of beautiful that it ends up solving a lot of these moral issues without even strictly trying to do it. So I'll address your first question about the turtles on the island, for example. Two main approaches that could happen with that. First of all, someone or some group of organizations could if they feel very strongly about this cause, they could be the ones to take control of the island and make sure that they outbid anyone else who's trying to rent the island for purposes of development. That's a very strong possibility. Or you could have what we already have, which is nationalization of specific areas of land, right? We already have national parks. This is the society coming together and saying, we want to make sure that certain plots of land don't get appropriated by individuals and stay in the commons, right? And so then you can have certain parts of land like that island stay in the commons, and that's a very viable solution. And then you also talked about Airbnb, for example. Yeah, I mean, Airbnb by itself, it's a business. There's nothing wrong with that business. People want to rent out their apartments, individually without having to, uh, have uh, having to go to a hotel and things like this. And it's very efficient for people to leave for the weekend and rent out their place for other people who are coming in on the weekend, things like that. It's a market that adds a level of efficiency to the economy that was not there before. The underlying issue is the housing crisis, which is, uh, pushing, uh, people to not be able to afford housing, and then Airbnb, simultaneously raises the rents because everyone is trying to, come in, and therefore, um, Airbnb is, seen as the issue, but the issue is actually the fact that there's physically not enough housing to house everyone, and certain people will go homeless because there's physically not enough houses. That's the main issue. And so we have to develop a method of making sure that the market itself, you said markets are not the answer to everything, but they are the answer to most economic issues. And the reason why is that as long as we're able to get rid of all of the unfairness in such market mechanisms, right? So as long as we're able to make sure that the laws and rules are such that people are unable to earn profits unfairly, right? As I spoke about in the first slide of this presentation, well then the market mechanism is actually beautiful because it allows for the distribution of computation across society of the value of different things. So you don't have to have a supercomputer determining the prices of apples and bread and houses and things like that. So we distribute that to the rest of society, and therefore we're able to have a very efficient economy that is able to accurately determine the value of various different things. But we do have to guard it with laws, and we have to make sure things such as positive and negative externalities are appropriately compensated for. A lot of the things that people are asking questions about are actually, various different positive and negative externalities. The Georgist position is to make sure that those things are compensated for properly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ari. Samuel, you definitely generated lots of questions here and a big response because there are lots of questions in the queue. So I'm just going to say, for the sake of getting everybody in, that just try to make it under 3 minutes, just so
Okay.
we can get everybody some time here. So, Phil, you're next.
Yeah, I already covered part of my question, but I think it's much broader than that because, yeah, I could see one island being recuperated. I am concerned about nature. I mean, like the wetlands are so broad, there's so many species, there's certain government reserves, but I rather doubt if economics could be the measure of all things. I even doubt if man is the measure of all things. And it just seems like it's embedded in economics, and man is the measure of all things. There are other living species that live and they need land and they can't pay taxes. So we have to take care of it. Even if we take care of it, that is still man is the measure of all things. We think it's deserving that they should have this park or something. We make the decisions that we should not make all the decisions because other living beings are in the world. So man is not the measure of all things.
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's about who has the ability to enforce their what they want to do. So unfortunately for some, unfortunately for many others, man is in charge of the world, and so we have to come together and agree upon what we're going to do with various different pieces of land. It's not up to the elks. What happens to their environment. So we have to be the ones making that decision, and it's going to be up to politics at the end of the day. So as long as people are able to come together in a consensus and say, this plot of land is very, very important for biodiversity, we want to protect it. As long as they're able to make that decision, Georgism is the best system to be able to implement that because it is placing the emphasis precisely on land.
Well, that
and it's
seems to
used.
be at least requiring a moral understanding beyond man in
Well,
some sense. So
okay.
yeah, there's moral dimension to this. Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you. Thank you very much. Okay, Will, you're next.
Yes, thanks, Ronan. My point is rather general rather than detailed, and it's to do with the statement: if you are receiving income without creating wealth, then someone somewhere is receiving wealth without creating income. Now,
No, the other way, it's creating wealth without receiving the corresponding income.
creating wealth without receiving income.
Yeah.
Right. Perhaps you just off balance me a little bit. But what I'm struggling to figure is my thinking is that the person who receives income without creating wealth probably doesn't exist. And there isn't a lot of time to go into
Okay.
that. But
I mean, so you disagree with that premise, I guess.
oh yes, oh
Okay.
yes. And I would start with a newborn baby. That baby, on the face of it, hasn't yet created wealth,
hmm
or is it, or one of them. But
Yeah.
that child is whether it's
Receiving wealth. Yeah.
wealth or income, we get a little bit confused there. But that child is still a full contributor in the sense that he or she energizes the person who goes out to work. So I don't really want to take it any further than that, but I'll
Okay,
just
I can
like
address that. Yeah. So
question the premise of that statement.
there are a few Georgists who are against or who are for things such as inheritance taxes, such and such. You know, for those reasons that you outlined. You know, the person who just got born, he has no right to things that he has not created, right? I am against that because I'm a firm believer of the ability of people to do whatever they want with their wealth, including giving it away to whoever they want. So I personally am against that, and many other Georgists are as well. But there is some debate on that. But I don't understand what you mean by people uh, who receive income without generating wealth don't exist. Landlords, they receive income every month from the rent on their land,
Oh,
and in order to receive that wealth, they for that month didn't do anything. They just
okay, I know where this will take us. It will take us to a long drawn out debate.
okay.
And that's where, and we haven't got time for that.
Okay,
But
thank you.
Thank
I do disagree because,
Okay.
and I'll make one last statement and move on. I would say with this statement, you would need to define whether you're talking instantaneously, whether the person receiving wealth, or this statement is for a set point in time, or is it drawn out? Is it instantaneous or is it continuous? But I'll just throw that out there because we just can't go into a long debate on
Okay.
this.
That's
But
yeah.
this is a
So
statement that, given time, I would dearly like to delve into a bit more.
Okay.
Okay, that's all.
thank you, Will. So
Thank you.
we actually are coming toward the end of the presentation, believe it or not, in the questions. We have three people who are still up to ask questions. Now, Ari, your hand is still up. I know you asked a question, unless I missed you, but I don't think I did. So we're going to go to Rami, and we're going to basically end.
Yeah, I got to ask my question. I'm going to lower my hand. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No problem. I just wanted to make sure I was not messing things up here. But we're going to ask the three questions that are left, and then you can stick around for a bit if you wish. But that'll constitute the end of the presentation. So, Rami, you're next.
Thank you, Ronan, and thank you, Samuel, for coming here tonight,
Thank you.
sitting on Georgism. I think Georgism, what George did was give us a way to create a form of funding public government as a public good. That's a thing that gives us courts, order, helps to enable and smooth civilization, and it fits nicely in that slot of how do you fund the government, but it sits within a wider context of governing in general, and to the extent possible, perhaps we can leave it up to local communities to decide when and or if ever there'll be exemptions. For instance, will retirees get to live out the end of their days in the homes that still make sense for them to live in? Do you want to create an exemption for that? Do you want an exemption for a nonprofit hospital? Yes or no? About a higher educational institution? And then how often do you want to reassess? Is that building still living up to its original thing that qualified for it as an exemption or not? And if it isn't, then perhaps it's time to reassess and take it out of the exemption pool. That's all I really wanted to add. Thank you.
That's a great point. Yeah, there's various different ways. This doesn't have to be, a single cookie cutter implementation. There's various different ways that all of these portions of Georgism can be implemented, and different societies can, or different parts of society, different counties, different states, different provinces can implement them slightly differently. So yeah, that's a great point.
Great, thank you very much. So Randy, you're next. Randall, you have a question?
Sorry, when I was trying to unmute. Mine's and by the way, thank you, Sammy, for your presentation.
Thank you.
Mine's more a theoretical question. When you were talking about corporations and the lost productivity, you tended to, I think it tends to view taxes as if some organization is just taking the money. Where you're talking about a land tax, it seems like the government is spending the money in some useful purpose. So to me, if you wanted to do a tax on the land, you're going to have to determine the productivity of the land if you want to equate it to the current income tax. But let's take it in a little different direction. If I was to say that we took the income tax and we just grossed it up and said that's part of the employee's productivity, and then we took that away from the employee, basically what we're doing is exactly the same thing as an income tax, although it has the benefit of being only taxable when the employee's productivity generates a profit. So in other words, let's take that example. Take an employee, grows his wages up by 30%, take the tax and then give it to the government. What's the difference? You're taxing it based on the productivity. Only the better part of having an income tax is if the productivity lacks or there's a problem with it, the income tax is reduced. You're not going to get that with the land transfer tax unless you determine the productivity of the land almost every year, almost every day. That's a theoretical question and statement.
Yeah, I didn't quite get the income tax scheme that you were talking about. I think I was a little bit confused with that.
Okay, well, what is taxes used for? They're used to do all sorts of services for the individual and some for the corporation. I didn't make a distinction there, but there is a distinction. So what you're doing is you're saying that's part of the employees. Let's just say all the income tax goes for the benefit of people, building highways, doing hospitalization, teaching the kids, teaching their children. All of it goes for that particular function. So what's the difference if a corporation was to take the employee's wages, gross it up by the tax rate, and then the government takes that from the employee?
Well, that's what happens.
In other words, I'm saying it's a part of the employee's compensation, part of their productivity. The advantage, though, is, first of all, if the productivity drops, the income taxes drops as well. But if you're going to tax land in the way you're talking about, you've got to tax it based on the productivity to the overall corporation, to the business. Or else, how are you going to tax it? So what I'm saying is income tax is probably, this as much as I hate it, income tax is probably a much better system than basing it just on the land.
Okay, so you're saying
that's the proposition I'm making.
You're saying the income tax is because it's a portion of the productivity of the worker. When the productivity of the worker goes up, the income tax goes up. When the productivity of the worker goes down, income tax goes down.
Precisely. And the taxes itself is spent on the benefit of the employee.
Yeah, but it disincentivizes work to the extent that we have an income tax. So you can imagine if we had 100% income tax, what's the effect, right? We get essentially communism. People, whatever one person makes is taken from them, and everybody essentially earns for themselves anything that they need, regardless of how much they work. That's what 100% income tax does.
Well, what you're going to say is if you take 100% of the corporation's revenue and taxes on the land, it's the same deal.
It's not the same deal. So I'll differentiate the two. So for the income, no matter how much a person works, that earnings is taken away from them, and then they get everything that they need, provided to them from society. And essentially that the incentive structure created from that is such that, okay, why should I work? Because I'm getting everything I need, and everything I work for is getting taken away from me in the first place. So at 100% income tax, there's no need to work, and so nobody works. And you can see that in the supply and demand curve that I showed earlier. The deadweight loss portion will grow to the entirety of the economy. And so the economy will be 100% inefficient. There'll be no work done at all. That's what happens with 100% income tax. Now you can say what happens with 90% income tax. It's pretty much the same thing. 80%, pretty much the same thing. Down to
What happens if you tax a corporation's revenue at 100%?
the same thing.
You do your land tax at 100%. It'd be the same deal.
So land is different. So if you were to, so the corporation essentially has various different expenditures, right? It has wages that it has to pay for its workers. It has the land value tax that it has to pay for the land that it uses, and then it also has profits that it must pay to its shareholders. Now, the profits section I will talk about in the next presentation, so I'll leave that out. But if we just talk about the wages that are being paid to the workers and the taxes in the form of land value tax, no matter how efficient the workers are working, if the workers are better, then they're going to get paid more, right? Or if the more you hire workers, the more you're going to pay the workers in terms of wages to workers. The land itself is determined by the neighborhood as well. So it's not the same thing. It's not like as soon as you're able to hire more workers, all of a sudden the land value tax goes up. No, it stays the same because you're paying the workers.
How are you going to determine the land tax?
It's determined in the two main methods that I talked about earlier. So either a land assessment method, or I would prefer a market mechanism that is able to.
Hold on.
Randy, just for the sake of, I apologize. I hate to break in, but
I got it, Ronan. I understand. I hear you.
It's just because we're officially done, but there are people who are still waiting. So my suggestion is, because there's a lot of interest, and this is a really interesting discussion between you and Sam, I think that we can extend the meeting if people are interested in asking questions. And Randy, we can come back to it because I'll stay. I have a question I want to ask and I haven't had a chance. So
yeah, I have to go, Ronan, so I got to leave. But listen, thanks very much. I understand the time constraint. Thanks, Samuel. Ronan.
Thank you, Rand.
I'll see you guys later. Take care.
Bye-bye. Okay, Bill Hollings, it's your turn.
Thank you.
Sorry, my apologies, Alex. You had your hand up and then you put it down. So, Bill, I'm going to go to Alex first, and then I'll go to you. Okay.
I appreciate it. My question was mostly asked by previous folks, so I'm good.
You're good. Okay.
Yeah,
so Bill, you're up now.
Thanks. So two things. The first is quick, and we don't need to discuss it very much, but I think your assessment of taxes, income taxes, as a productivity loss is suspect in the sense that, like, you use the example of a 100% tax. Well, I mean, 100% divide by zero, etc. Let's stay away from that. But let's say the free market says I work for a place that I'm happy that they are paying me enough. So let's say my standard of living is I want to live at $50,000 a year. So it doesn't really matter to me whether, as long as I get that $50,000, it doesn't really matter to me whether the company has spent $60,000 and $10,000 has gone to taxes, or the company spent $1 million hiring me and everything for $940,000 or $50,000 has gone to taxes, right? All that matters is the company is willing to pay that, and I'm willing to pay that. I'm willing to live at that rate. I'm willing to work at that job for that amount of money. And hopefully that all that money that's going to the government is being spent wisely. But I don't really need to talk about that. I just want to make that point. But I do actually have a question. What do you do in the case where income, like you talk about like landlords and rent and stuff like that, but let's take the example of a software genius who comes out with a new software product, sitting in his cabin in the Northwest Territories, where he's paying absolutely zero, almost zero land tax on that. And he corners the market and accumulates half of society's wealth as a result. And society can't possibly benefit from that because that person is paying almost next to nothing in terms of rent, land tax, but has
accumulated an enormous amount of society's wealth or income or annual income. So how do you balance that imbalance?
Okay, so first of all, you're saying that this person cornered the market. So what that means essentially is monopoly.
No, no,
So
no, no. No. Let's say it's take Elon Musk. Okay, the guy's worth half a trillion dollars, right? So
mhm.
that's a half a trillion dollars that has, even though he's made it legitimately in our free market society, it's still half a trillion dollars. Essentially, he could be living in a shack in anywhere
Yeah,
and paying almost no land
you
tax.
you think Elon's wealth is not solely determined by the intellectual property that he owns? Like that's the majority of his wealth is his
No,
companies and the intellectual properties that they own. If
no,
everyone was able
no.
to build Teslas, then
Mhm.
Elon would not be able to make as much money as he could.
No, everybody is able to buy Teslas because you wouldn't be
Build
taxing it.
build Teslas. That's
Pardon?
the
Yeah,
issue.
yeah.
Only Tesla is able to build Teslas, right? So we
Right.
have this technological innovation that
Mhm.
is being protected by intellectual property.
No,
And the
no,
person
no,
who owns
no.
that
You're
intellectual
making an
property,
assumption there. Amazon, Amazon. Let's talk about Amazon
mhm,
because cars are cars. So anybody can. I mean, lots of people do. I mean, I can go to Chevrolet and buy an electric car, right? So that's just the free market at work. You don't need IP to protect that. Or Amazon. There's nothing magical about what Amazon does. They just do a good job. And in the meantime, Jeff Bezos has again become a half trillionaire,
yeah.
right? So those are examples where all that money is effectively now gone from society.
So there is something to say about network effects, and Georges always talk about various different areas where there could be different kinds of things that affect wealth production besides all this land stuff. So we talk about network effects and IP and how they affect each other all the time. But what I would like to say is, if the company or the person is not taking anything away from society, and they've earned all of their wealth solely through their work in improving society, I see no reason why we should limit how much wealth they gain because it's through a just means.
But
If
that money is gone from society, right?
that's not how the economy works, it's not gone from society. The money is still there. We'll talk about money in the next presentation. Don't worry about that. We will get to it. A lot of the questions, and this is why I put these two presentations together. I did not want to split it up. They are very related, but just in the interest of time, it had to be split.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill. So I think that officially the presentation is over and the meeting is over. However, given the interest, we're going to go on a little bit longer. And John Moniz, you have a question, so go ahead. It's your turn, John.
Yeah. Thanks, Ronan. I had to unmute. Yeah, thank you, Samuel. I really enjoyed your presentation. And I think my question might be a little basic, so I apologize for that.
No worries.
Um, so I think you're saying that you only pay taxes if you own land. Will that sort of incentivize people to rent only and not own land?
So
Because that way they could make wealth without paying taxes.
when you rent, you're essentially paying for so let's take this land value tax system. Imagine there's a full land value tax and there's no other taxes, right? So certain people will rent a plot of land and they'll build, let's say, a 20-story apartment building on it, and then the revenue that they get from the land from the renters who are renting the apartments, that revenue will then go into the land value tax, right? So they're essentially paying, the renters are paying for the land by proxy, essentially.
Okay. As far as their income is, the people that do not own the land wouldn't be paying any tax. I'm just wondering if that would kind of push people to not want to own land, which in fact would lower the price of land overall, which would
Well,
lower the taxes too, I guess.
what would end up happening is that there would be no economic uh like there would the value of land as a one-time purchase would drop to zero, right? Because when you purchase something as a one-time purchase, what are you saying? You're saying that this thing, is gonna be profitable for me. But if all of the profits that are incurred by the land are taken as a tax, then uh, there is no external profits to be made from that land, and so therefore the sale value, the one-time sale value of the land will asymptotically drop to zero. What will happen then is essentially anyone can purchase a piece of land as long as they pay the tax for it. And there will be no benefit to being a landowner versus a land leaser. So that's what would
Right.
end up happening.
So you could get revenue from the lands and that would be worth something.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I do have a quick question before we leave, and I just want you, Samuel, to elaborate a little bit on patents as commons. I understood that correctly, right? The idea is that patents would be commons. But I'm sort of lost on how incentive would not be lost as well. I think you talked about it, but I didn't quite follow your arguments. And also, the other thing that I'm not clear on, uh, patents, according to Georgism, is sort of equivalent to land in that it's a constant. But patents are not constants, are they? Because there are different patents that are taken out every year, every day, and also there are iterations on patents, and so on and so forth. So it becomes very nuanced what a patent is and how
Yeah.
people develop on them. I'm just trying to understand the notion and how it would work.
So the idea is that patents are essentially just ideas that we allow people to monopolize, right? And so ideas are part of the commons.
Right. So, okay, I understand that. I mean, I understand ideas are out there, and
Yeah.
once somebody comes up with an idea, it should be something that is available to everybody. I'm wondering if there is a relationship to what we call like open source. Is that sort of an idea that is related?
Yes, it's very related, and that's actually a really good question. So the programming sector has come to this conclusion before anyone else has, essentially, or at least Henry George came to it first, but programming has come to it very quickly. And the reason for that is that programs are products that are pure ideas. They have nothing else to them. And so economically, it's very hard to justify closed source programs because people can copy the code, people can just create multiple instances of a piece of code with essentially no cost. And so when it comes to things like ideas that are, essentially just digital, they're information, patents are the same. It makes no sense to kind of close it off and try to justify um, trying to charge people for it. So that's why open source has grown and blown up and become the main actual economic sector of programming. It's way past any closed source software out there. So it just goes to show how much it makes sense to also consider patents and copyrights and other things in the IP space. To consider those things for essentially changing the way the monopolization of those things work.
Yeah, okay, that's very interesting. There's a lot to talk about there. We can
Yeah.
go on for a very long time, but I think we're going to stop. Howard, you have the last question, and then we're going to call it a night.
It's not a question. Just want to thank Samuel for a very provocative and interesting presentation. And I'm really looking forward to the next part, part two. I'm specifically interested in sort of George's broader theories of value, which would include labor theories of value, what he has to say, what he might have to say about wage labor, income interest, capital, investment interest, and social value more generally. So I think you've really teed it up nicely for the next round of discussions and placing Georgism within a sort of a broader set of economic theories. I'm curious too generally about some of the crossover and maybe differences between Georgism and classical Marxism, and where they overlap and where they depart. So I was hoping maybe theories of value and theory of labor and capital would get at some of that. I know you've got Locke as the as the foundation in terms of property rights. But
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see where it goes from there. So just to say thanks very much, and I'm looking forward to the next part of the discussion.
Thank you. Well, that was a really good review, I guess. But to disappoint you a bit, the theory of value is different. So yeah, George and Marx, I think, might have had some correspondences or just some talkings about each other. They essentially don't agree with each other at all. Obviously, Marx has the labor theory of value, and with George, we take the subjective theory of value. So essentially, value is what people are willing to buy a thing for. You can put as much labor as you want into moving a rock back and forth. It's not going to make it any more valuable.
Let me go back to what the other gentleman was saying about hospital and their sort of, or even the turtles in terms of whether market value whether the market can adequately be on its own a determinant of value. And those might be broader philosophical questions, right?
Yeah, as long as we make sure that we remove all of the issues behind things like interest and land ownership, things that pervert the actual mechanism of markets, then we'll come to see that the market mechanism itself is not the issue. It's underlying theories of property that are the actual issue.
Over financialized capitalism.
I'll talk about interest in the next talk. So wait for that.
Okay, thank you, Howard. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for coming. Alla, I'll pass it to you, and you can close it off.
Yeah, thank you, Ronan, and thank you, Samuel. That was really intriguing, provocative, and I'm looking forward to the next one. And again, if someone didn't ask his questions, please, we're gonna post it on YouTube soon, so please go there and ask continue your discussion. We would appreciate it. Everyone would see it. And thank you very much for everyone who could come and stayed so long and give us energy and developed our thoughts to make us better and makes our society better. Thank you for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.